Got it.
and then the usual rule applies that the recording belongs to you until such time as you say it can be something else other than that.
Okay. Fair enough. I agree.
Okay. And this is going to be day 2, if I'm recalling correctly.
Yes. Yes, it is.
Anything we
And
should go
go
ahead,
ahead.
go for it.
And a little different in that the first of all, I was kind of on vacation. This is the recording are all from February 7th, and we were out of town. We rented this cottage at Stinson Beach. It had been my birthday the day before, so it was a different kind of rhythm to the day, and a different kind of rhythm to the beeper. Beeper was like fast and furious. I had 6 beeps within an hour and a half. Um, So that was different. So some are a little repetitive.
So the beeper is random, and it can go from 0 to 60 minutes basically. So it would be theoretically possible to get 6 beeps in 6 minutes.
Yeah, theoretically. There was
Yeah.
one beep that was, I wondered about the machine because it was very fast and it turned itself off. But I took it as a beep. I didn't turn it off.
So there's a number of possibilities for that. One, the thumb wheel on the beeper is a little picky, more picky than I would like, but that's the way those things are. And if you twist the thumb wheel a little bit, either by bumping it up against or something, or else the machine thinks that it's turned itself off and back on again. So that may
Well,
very well
it
be
gave
what
me a
happened.
random beep, which was the point.
That's really right.
Yeah.
All right, I would say let's go for them and see what
Yeah.
we got.
Okay. I put on the beeper at 10 o'clock a.m. The first beep was at 10:31. Judith, who's my wife, is reading to me. We're both sitting on the couch reading, and she interrupts me to read from her book. She's reading The Man Without Qualities. I hear at the beep the word knowledge in a sentence that precedes it, that proceeds, knowledge is a mode of conduct, a passion. I'm completely confused at the meaning of this sentence. It's a very intricate sentence to hear read aloud, and precisely why she thinks I need to hear it. So the thought that's forming in my head is, why? Huh. It's not particularly well formed. I'm hoping as time goes by, it will answer itself. But that was the moment was that word and that thought. Knowledge, why?
So she's reading to you. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
She stopped, she looked up from her book and said, got to hear this. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand the import of the passage or why it was relevant to me. I mean, the book it's a very abstract book full of, philosophy of life. I've never read it, but from everything she tells me. But she thought this was a very meaningful sentence. Knowledge is a mode of conduct, a passion. The character was basically saying knowledge could be negative. It could be a negative thing. Too much knowledge or the quest for knowledge. And that there's an ethics attached to it. But, we proceeded to discuss it later. But at that moment, I'm like, my brow is knitted. I'm like, why are you telling me this? And interrupting my book.
So the why is about why is she telling you this rather than why did the writer write that or
Yes,
why
yes.
does knowledge have its place in the sentence? It's specifically about her motive or her.
Yeah, I didn't spend a lot of time trying to parse the sentence. That's not where my mind was. My mind was kind of, why am I hearing this?
Okay. And are there any details of that thought, how it's present to you? Like, are you saying to yourself, quote, why, unquote, or is
No,
it?
I wouldn't say it was verbal. It was just kind of like the way you'd go, huh? You know, um, it wasn't, it wasn't shaped. It was just kind of uh, a mental question forming itself that I wouldn't say was verbal necessarily, or, I mean, whether it was why or huh, I couldn't tell you. Um, it was a pretty kind of um, it wasn't a formed intellectual reaction. It was just kind of like, when you encounter something that's obscure, this kind of question mark forms in your head.
So one question is this, do you experience this as being a mental thing and in your head thing as opposed to a bodily,
Yeah.
I'm not twisting around or whatever that
Yeah.
could
No, I
convey
think
that?
that there probably was a kind of, I mean, I don't remember this specifically, but it was that moment where question would form in your head and you'd knit your brow, like that.
Right.
That's kind of where I was.
And so was your experience of knitting your brow or was your experience of the cognitive
It was the
mentally?
cognitive. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm guessing it had that outward manifestation.
Okay.
It was a pretty primal feeling. It wasn't, it was just that kind of um, when you're confused. I think there's another moment of confusion too in this.
Okay.
And I didn't know how to register confusion. Was it, how verbal was it? It didn't seem very verbal. It was a state of mind that I was aware of, a confused state of mind. But to say whether it was emotional, sensory, or verbal, I'd be hard pressed.
How about between emotional and cognitive? Like confusion is one thing, thinking why is seems like another thing. Could be anyway.
Yeah, it was I mean, I would say it leaned more toward cognitive, but it did have a kind of emotional texture to it because I was also being interrupted. It's like, why are you interrupting me? Um,
Okay.
it was colored by a slight annoyance and an effort to be patient and listen to this whole thing and see if I could sort it out. So I was kind of like, half of me wanted to try to understand why she was reading this and what the import of the sentence she was reading was. And the other half was like, this is an interruption.
Okay.
But it's your marriage. You're being as polite as you can.
Absolutely. Okay. Then I think I'm good.
Okay.
Number two.
The second is 5 minutes later, 10:36. We're reading side by side on the couch. This is a very rainy day on Wednesday. I'm reading To the Lighthouse, and I'm struggling to follow this page-long sentence. And I find Virginia Woolf difficult to read. I'm reading her out of my interest in consciousness, stream of consciousness, my book project. And there's this long sentence which I could read to you, but I'm on the word sop when the beeper goes off.
SOP, stop.
SOP. Mrs. Ramsey is thinking about the poor and her charity. Let me just read you what the SOP is part of.
So I don't think you necessarily have to read me that. I'm more interested in what your experience is than what the book is.
So I'm trying to untangle this sentence. I mean, the short part of it is whose charity was half a sop to her own indignation, half a relief to her own curiosity. It's one of those, it was a very long sentence. It was like a full page, and I'm trying to untangle the syntax, and it's very intricate. But I remember when I got to the word sop, thinking, and this is the moment, that it was an odd word in this context, and that the flavor of it stood out among all the longer Latinate words that Woolf uses. I don't know if it's an Anglo-Saxon word, but it had that kind of immediacy and, brevity that I associate with Anglo-Saxon words. And I was like, that's an unusual word for Virginia Woolf.
So is your experience at the moment of the beep a reaction to the unusual word or a comment on the unusual characteristics of it, the Anglo-Saxon by comparison to Latin?
I wouldn't say I drew it out to that extent. I was, at the moment, it was just like, weird word, sop. And that's what I was thinking. And that, it wasn't a fluid reading experience where I was conjuring the waking dream that you're supposed to have when you're reading a novel. It was just all about words. um, and uh, and this was one that had a certain value to it that seemed out of place. And I was just kind of wondering.
So the question that I asked a minute ago, I think was a little bit more involved than I really had in mind. What I really had in mind was, is this a reaction to a strange word, or is this some kind of a thinking process about the strangeness of the word?
I'm not sure I get the distinction between those two options. Will you try that again?
Well, I could be reading along and get to sop and have some kind of a reaction to that.
I
Some
might have kept
maybe about
going. If not for the beeper, I might have kept going. Oh, stop. Okay.
okay.
But the fact that I knew that was the very moment, again, this is retrospective. I started dwelling on it more than I might have. But the nature of this experience, I mean, it was definitely cognitive. I'm very attuned to language precisely because, in my view, she's failing to create a more fluid visual experience. So I'm reading word by word, trying to parse it, make sense of it. So I'm more sensitive to the words than I might be in a writer who was more narrative, had more narrative flow.
So I haven't articulated the question that I've got yet, I don't think. And my question is this something like that I react to the word as the stream of words are going by as I'm parsing them along, I'm reacting to that word, or am I somehow analyzing cognitively? That's a weird word, even though I don't
I'm
might don't.
reacting. I'm just reacting. I haven't gotten to the formulation of why did this stop me besides the beat? I mean, why was I aware that this was kind of out of character? That came later. I mean, if we want to separate that out from the thought, it was like, you have a kind of instinctual reaction. This is out of place, right? I mean, this doesn't fit. Surprising word. And only later did I think, well, it's a more vivid Anglo-Saxon word than I expect from Virginia Woolf.
So I still haven't articulated
No,
the question correctly here. So
or I haven't understood it. I'm sorry.
or there's several possibilities here. So the question I'm guessing for me, the question I'm trying to ask is this merely a reaction, or is this in the foothills of the beginnings of an analytical process? I haven't gotten fully down there. I'm not thinking about Anglo-Saxon versus Latinate or whatever, but but I'm but I'm somehow cogitating about the word rather than just reacting to the word. That's, I guess, what my question is.
Got it. I would say for the purpose of our exercise, I was just reacting.
Okay.
And that the cogitation, one of the things the beeps do is give you an opportunity to think about the thought, right?
Right. But
And
our
so
task is to
isolate it. Yeah.
grasp what happens just before you think about the thought, which is not
What happens before is I just have this reaction, odd.
okay.
It was just that moment. Um, and then whether I would have undergone the interrogation of that moment, if not for the beep, I don't know.
Okay.
It's hard to say. I mean, I often do stop and think about that. I'm a writer. I pay attention to word choices and think that she must have also, and what is she trying to convey? But I'm also in the thicket of this long sentence, just trying to machete my way out. so,
Okay.
so I don't know what would have taken priority. But in the moment, it was just a reaction. I mean, I'm reading and, some word choices just are effortless and you don't even notice them. Others you admire. This one just was odd.
Okay. Then I think I'm good.
Okay.
Number 3.
Let's see. Oh, yeah, this one was funny. So this one's at 11 o'clock, only 25 minutes later. I'm sitting at the kitchen table. I've gotten up from the couch. I've just closed my laptop. I forget what I was doing on it. And I'm looking out through the window in the that I'm seeing through, and there's a live oak tree which has a bunch of dead leaves, and it's raining. And I'm thinking, what am I thinking? Anything? Pretty scene? What would I say if the beeper went off now? And then it goes off. I have a telepathic relation to this thing.
I guess so.
I can make it go off.
Or maybe it has one telepathic
Yes, it
relationship to
could go the other way. But I was actually thinking at that moment, what would I say if the beeper went off now? And then it did. It was a very pretty scene. It was a cozy rainy day. I took a picture of the scene. It was, I think, a perception without a thought, except the one, what am I thinking? But I never came to any conclusion. The conclusion was, this is a pure perception. This doesn't have a thought attached to it, unless a perception is a thought. And I don't know, is a perception a thought? You know, sensory perception?
Well, I would break those things apart, but I think different people have different
I tend to also. I mean, I tend to think that I've been sensitized to this in this process, that there are parts of the day or parts of in experience where I'm just taking in information and I'm not mentally reacting to it. Obviously, my mind is processing the information, but I have no comment. I have no, if I search for an emotional tone to it, I could find it, but it's very much, the windshield is clear.
So at the moment of this beep, it seems to me, I guess I've heard sort of two things. One, I'm looking out the window at the live oak, and the other is I'm asking myself, I guess, what am I thinking? What would I say?
And I've put that question to myself many times since this exercise started. It's one of the things it does. I mean, we've talked about this, makes you kind of more mindful. And I've had many times where I'm saying, if the beeper went off, or if I were wearing the beeper, this isn't always when I'm wearing it. It's any time. What am I thinking right now? It's no accident that happened. I've had that thought a lot of times.
Okay. And how does that, and I'm gathering that thought is present just before the beep occurs. So that thought is caught in flight by the beep.
Yes.
So far? Okay.
That metaphor sounds right. Caught in flight.
And how is that thought present to you?
You know, the words I wonder are there. I would say it is verbal. You know, what am I thinking now? I wonder what I would say if the beeper went off now. So it's another question mark forming, like that very first one. It's a question mark in my head, but it's a different kind because it is fully formed. And I would say it is verbal.
So I've heard several versions of the potential verbality here, which would be something like, what am I thinking? What would I say? I wonder what I would say. What am I thinking now?
What I wrote down at that very moment or right after is, what would I say if the beeper went off now? And then it did. So I do think those were the words that were in my head at that moment.
And that is a well-formed sentence as is written. Quote, what would I say if the beeper went off now? Question mark, unquote. I mean, that's,
yeah.
Was that whole quoted sentence present to you?
I think so, more or less. I mean, there might have been some little change, but I wrote that down very quickly.
Okay.
So it was, I mean, I was remembering it.
And so one distinction that some people interested in inner speech would say, well, you don't really need the whole sentence. So maybe what would I say would imply, if the beep interrupted right now, I don't have to say that to myself because I'm talking to myself. I know what I mean. So all I have to do is say, what would I say?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, you can truncate I mean, self-talk is usually truncated and there's often no I in it. But in this one, there was. I don't know why. I mean, I felt like it was a full sentence.
Okay. And how does this sentence present itself to you? As opposed, for example, are you seeing it, hearing it, speaking it? Do you have the words there with no?
I would say I'm hearing it. I would say there's an inner voice and it's me. It's recognizable as me.
And in your voice, the way you would hear your voice if you were to play it back on a tape recorder?
Yeah, I think so.
As opposed to the way you would hear your voice if you were speaking it? Like when you're talking to me, you're no doubt hearing what you're saying, or you could be in it at least some of the time. And that might be a different experience from hearing your voice being played back.
Yeah, it might be. I mean, the internal voice we hear is a little less enunciated, a little less public. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you're speaking to yourself, even though all the words were there. There wasn't any volume to it. There wasn't any timbre to it. It was just that's me thinking.
And
it was familiar to me. It might not be familiar to anyone else. I'm not sure if it would resemble a recording. And it doesn't resemble what we're doing right now. It's quieter than that.
So one of the distinctions that some people make is between whether you seem to be receiving these words or whether you seem to be creating these words. Are you the driver of them or are you the receiver of them?
Yeah, and I recognize that distinction, and I would say I'm the driver in this case. This isn't a voice, this isn't that dialogic voice you sometimes have with yourself. On the one hand, on the other hand, this is kind of just me. I'm generating this thought.
And many people, not everybody, and I'm just trying to get us make sure we're as close to on the same page as we can get. Some people would say if I'm generating it, then it must be like I'm more speaking it than I'm hearing it. If I'm the creator of these words.
Yeah, I would say I'm more, I'm speaking it, but to myself and, not for public consumption.
Okay. So I'm speaking.
Like in my internal monologue, the words, I wonder, come up a lot. I wonder if this, I wonder if that, I wonder if I should do that. It's just kind of the way I frame self-questions.
So we started out this conversation with the notion that I'm hearing my voice say, what would I say if the beeper went off right now? And now we seem to sort of morph that into I'm saying to myself, what would I say if the beeper went off right now?
What's the difference?
In one case, I'm hearing my voice saying it, and in the other case, I feel myself to be actually saying it. And the difference there would be sort of like a tape recorder. I could say it into a tape recorder, or I could hear it coming out of a tape recorder. But maybe that doesn't matter to you, or doesn't make a distinction.
I don't know. I mean, don't we do both? When we say something to ourselves, we're also hearing it. I mean, it's a way, I don't know, when I write, I form a sentence in my head and play it back. How does it sound? Is it accurate? So I see those two things as very closely allied, forming a sentence in your head and then listening to it at the same time, or nanoseconds after. So is that unusual?
What I would say is that the conversations that we're having are on the verge of impossible. They're at the best difficult, possibly impossible, and maybe impossible. So I'm not arguing in favor of there being a right answer. I think for some people, they become convinced there is a right answer to that question, and I'm hearing it or I'm speaking it, whichever one. I don't care which one it is, but people eventually understand what that distinction is, and then they can apply that to themselves. So it seems to me.
Yeah.
But some people can't. But what I would say is that what makes it difficult are a couple of things in the conversations that we're having right now. So I'm going to critique our conversation here.
Okay.
And so in the course of this conversation, you have advanced some sort of, I would call, self theories about the way inner speaking is. Very often I talk to myself and I say, I wonder, and most of the time I don't have the full sentence, but this time I did have the full sentence, and doesn't everybody, when they're talking to themselves, hear themselves or whatever? Those are what I would call sort of self theories or private theories or something about the way thing is. And that is I would say, sort of the enemy of the process that we're engaged in here. The question is not whether you typically have full sentences or not. The question is whether at this particular beep, whether this is a typical beep or an atypical beep, don't really care. The question is whether this was a full sentence. And so the object is what I call to bracket away all those what I call presuppositions. And it's a trick, or not a trick. It requires effort and practice and whatever. And the other thing I would say is that these beeps are a couple of days old. These beeps came from
I was going to say
7th.
Last time we did this, it was the very next day, and this time today's Friday, and this was Wednesday.
Yeah, and I would say that is a risk to the procedure.
So you prefer fresh beeps?
I prefer fresh beeps. That's right. And my rule of thumb about that is you can sleep on the beep one time, which means that the beeps could be from yesterday and it'd be all right with me. But from 2 days ago, I think it's my experience is that the more you sleep on it, the more it's likely that you confuse a presupposition with an actual apprehension of a particular beep. And it's very common that we have to, so I'm not being particularly critical of Michael here. Look, God damn it, I told you to do it in 1 day and you did it 2 days or whatever. This is not what that's about. This is the way this process is, because people, the Michaels of my world, don't grasp the sensitivity of the procedure, because it seems like, well, I should be able to do this today because it's going to be interesting. I should be able to have these interesting beeps. And that, I think you have to sort of develop a taste for, well, there's a lot of things that might be difficult. We don't know which ones are going to be problematically difficult, but let's see whether we can set aside as many of them as we can so that we can get as close as we can to the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically what I spend my professional life doing, is corralling people to try to get as close to the ability to describe their experiences as they can get, as we can get. And it's going to be less than perfect. And it may very well for Michael not matter a whit whether he sleeps on it for 2 days or 5 days or 1 day. But it might, and it's hard to know that. And so my strategy there is, well, let's just try to get beeps from the day before, and then we won't have to worry about that aspect anyway. And
what about the same day? Would that be even better?
I would say the closer the better.
Yeah. But, well, maybe next time we should try the same day and schedule our call for a little later in the day.
And that's fine with me. And so as a general rule, sometimes people will have beeps from yesterday and beeps from today. We're meeting at whatever time we're meeting, 10:30, and they did a couple of beeps from today and a couple of beeps from last night. And I will generally start with the fresher beeps because I like fresh beeps. But
fresh beeps.
But
I like fresh beeps too.
But I specifically do not want to be understood as being critical here. This is we have to develop an understanding of of how we can do as good a job as we can do for this, and that's part of what I call the iterative procedure that we've got to work towards the ideal. We're going to fall short at every step, but we can get as good at it as we can.
No, I'm very cognizant of the difficulty of answering questions like that, and my theorizing, if that's what it is trying to explain something that seems perplexing. to you, which didn't seem that perplexing to me, that I was kind of speaking it and hearing it at the same time.
Right. So back to beep number 3 here, which we haven't talked about, an aspect that we haven't talked about, and maybe we've talked enough about this beep that we've already screwed this aspect up, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So your eyeballs are aimed outside the window, I'm gathering. You're looking at this live.
I'm looking at the tree. I'm paying attention to whether it's still raining because I'm hoping to get outside.
And the question is, how much of that is in your directly apprehension at the moment of the beep, and how much of that is, well, my eyeballs are aimed at it, my retina is no doubt processing it, my LGN or wherever the processing happens is taking place, but at the moment of the beep, I'm thinking, what am I thinking right now?
Well, the thought having the visual perception at the same time is the thought. There's no tension between those two things. To my mind, I'm having this thought while I'm looking out there. And
so I don't have any problem with that either. The question is, of the looking out there, how much of that are you apprehending right at the moment of the beep? Because it's possible that your eyeballs are still looking at that and your nervous system is processing it, but your center of attention is entirely on the question, or maybe your attention is divided and half in the question and half looking out the window.
I would say that I was not attending to the scene when that question crossed my mind. It was kind of the wallpaper at that point. You have a fresh visual perception and it commands your attention for a little while, but the longer you look at it, the more it just kind of is background. So I would say that the tree with the dead leaves and the rain was not in the foreground of this moment. It had retreated to the background, but it was present.
Okay.
And that the question, what am I thinking? Or what would I be thinking? Which turned into what am I thinking? Was kind of occupied my attention more. But it was idle. It wasn't like, what am I thinking? It was like, am I having any thoughts? Maybe I'm not having enough thoughts for this whole experiment. I feel sort of empty. And thinking about all those moments, I said earlier that there are a lot of moments where I don't have any thoughts, which is fine. My wife often says, "What are you thinking?" And I actually will say, "Really nothing right now. I'm just looking around."
So it's entirely possible to look at the scene that you've been describing and be processing that in a non-cognitive way. And so in that case, it might be that you would say, well, I'm looking at the rain on this particular leaf and the way that particular drop, that's my attention is on this leaf and that drop. That would be possible. And it would be possible to say about that experience, well, I'm looking at the rain on the live oak. And it would also be possible to say about that experience, well, really at that particular moment, I wasn't looking at the live oak in general. I was looking at this particular leaf with that particular drop on it. And those would be sort of two very different experiences, or could be experientially very different. The retina might be the same and the photons could be the same, but the experience might be very different.
For me, it was a scene because I'm seeing it through a multi-pane window, right? So it's a picture. I had thought a little earlier, why are there so many dead leaves on that oak? But I wasn't thinking about that at the moment. I wonder if it has sudden oak death or something like that, or, it's a very important tree in this yard and it would be a shame to lose it. I mean, all that I had already thought about. But at the moment, it was like, I guess I could have answered with that. What am I thinking right now? I had been thinking about that. But I felt like kind of empty of thought at that moment when that question formed.
Except for the question,
yes, I know, which is a thought.
Which is a thought.
Yeah, I know.
which is what
And
makes which is what makes armchair introspection difficult, basically.
yeah, I see
Because
that
that thought, what am I thinking about right now, is every
is a
bit a
thought,
thought,
but
but it
it's a
doesn't seem like it ought to be the thought, and so
no. It doesn't get at what you want to get at.
then you're led to say, well, I'm thinking nothing,
Yeah,
when in fact I'm thinking, what am I thinking?
right.
On to number 4.
That is the catch-22 here, isn't it?
It is, but what I would say is the beeper helps that, because the beeper it is at least beeper is not perfect by any means, but it's at least it at least identifies from the outside the moment to be looking at. Whereas in regular introspection, you have to think about that on your own. Well, this
And
is
it slides.
yeah,
It's much more elusive, I know, because
right,
you're either thinking the thought after you said, "What am I thinking?" or you're thinking the thought before it.
right,
And I see that. I see that it's kind of slippery otherwise, and that you take up the introspection itself takes up a lot of bandwidth,
right.
and you only have so much.
And the beeper helps that, or can help that, may help that. We will see whether it helps
Yeah.
that.
And probably more as I become less self-conscious. I'm obviously still keenly aware I'm wearing the beeper and I'm participating in this exercise, and I'm hoping it'll fade. I mean, it's starting to fade a little more in the background.
Number 4.
So this one was at 11:15, 15 minutes later, and Judith and I are sitting in separate, she's on the couch, I'm in this comfortable chair, we're meditating. This is something we do for 20 minutes every day. I'm 7 minutes in, and I have lost my focus on my breath, which I'm trying to maintain, and I'm worrying. I have a moment of worry, and specifically, I'm worrying about my heart and thinking back to waking up during the night and feeling some palpitations. And I have a history of AFib that's hasn't been a problem in a long time, but every now and then it pops up. Um, and I am at that moment re-experiencing or trying to re-experience the feeling, which is kind of a rushy feeling, a speeding up of heartbeat. And it felt, I mean, the worry is kind of cognitive, but the feeling was reconstructing the sensation, feeling it again as memory. I didn't actually have any particular feeling, but I was rerunning the experience. And again, this is a lot for one moment, but I was rehearsing possible explanations as you do when you worry. Could this have been an episode of AFib or just just one of those, a dream woke me up and my heart was racing, and I didn't know, but it had kept me up for a while during the night, and while I was trying not to think about it and focus on my breath, it was pushing its way into my awareness.
So that is a complicated explanation and possibly a complicated experience. So I would like to tease it apart, because there's a lot of potentials there. One is that this is about worrying. Another is that it's a recollection of waking up. Another is that it's an attempt to recreate, at least, or remember exactly what that felt like. And another is the explanation, potential explanations. Are all those present right at the moment of the beep, or is some of that context and some of that background and part of it is central?
To me, worrying is often a replaying of something. You're worrying something, you're chewing on it, you're holding it. So I'm both resensing the experience and wondering what it means. Is it something to worry about? Is it serious? Is it not serious? So there is both a cognitive dimension and a sensory dimension because it's not so abstract that I'm just having a worry and thinking about it diagnostically. I'm kind of trying to summon what it felt like.
And would you say you were more trying to summon what it felt like, or more advancing potential explanations or figuring it out, more cognitive, so more cognitive or more bodily reconstructive? Or
My
doesn't that
notes
question make sense?
suggest, again, and maybe here the memory issue, that I am re-experiencing this sensation, this rushy feeling. Um, that was in the foreground at that moment. If you extend the moment a little bit, there's the trying to figure out what it meant, possible explanations. But based on what I wrote first, it was re-experiencing this sense of a palpitation.
Okay, and I agree that might be, this is one of those things that might be easier if we were closer in time to the occasion. But let me ask about it as if we could remember. And so at one point you said it is re-experiencing the palpitation, and at another point you said I'm trying to re-experience the palpitation. Those could be different kinds of things.
Yeah.
One is about the attempt, and the other is about the success or whatever. What you've just said when you've been consulting your notes is about the re-experiencing side rather than the trying side.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
you,
and I'd want to rely on that, I think. Um, the trying may have pre-existed this or succeeded it. But what I was moved to write down was that I was re-experiencing this rushy sensation. But that in itself is not worry. It's a cause for worry. And I think, the word worry was very prominent in this. I knew I was worrying. I had enough awareness to say not just that I was re-experiencing something, but I was worrying about it.
so that's what makes this job interesting. Makes these conversations interesting, and that is I think there's no question that this is a worrying moment. How much of that worry is directly apprehended, and how much is sort of the context, and what's happening at the moment is just I'm re-experiencing the rushy thing. That we could try to tease that apart. But before we do that, what I want to try to tease apart is the difference between I feel a rushy, and I'm taking this to be a rushy chesty thing,
Yeah.
right? So on the one hand, I feel rushy sensations in my chest. And on the other hand, I could say, well, I remember the details of my palpitation. There was a rushiness in my chest. So one of those is a recollection of the fact of rushiness, and the other is a re-experiencing of chesty rushiness. And those could be very different kinds of things.
Yeah, I'm not having the same experience. I'm having a sensory memory of it.
So
This is
that's what I
definitely a
would.
memory. And that worrying, I mean, a lot of worrying to me is bringing up memories, right? Or
So
or anticipatory things. So yeah, I'm remembering what it was like.
So the word remembering is a problematic word for me in a variety of different kinds of ways. So my question is, at the moment of this beep, is this more like I feel it in my chest? It's obviously a memory because I'm recreating in my chest, and it's not, my heart isn't palpitating now, but I, in my imagination, feel it in my chest. I can do that. I can do a lot of things in my imagination which don't have anything to do with the reality of my body. So, for example, I can imagine seeing a castle in Spain, and my eyeballs aren't seeing the castle in Spain, but I can I can imagine it, and I think it's possible to imaginatively recreate a feeling in my chest as if I were having a heart palpitation. And now my heart isn't having a palpitation, but my bodily receptors are recreating that experientially for me. So I think that's possible, and I don't
Yeah,
want.
no, it was fairly vivid. It's not like it was totally abstract. I had a memory of feeling this rushy sensation. I mean, I'm evoking it for myself, I guess. So it is, I mean, I know what you mean with a visual recollection. You can summon an image in your head, and I guess you can summon a feeling in your body in the same way without exactly having it again.
That is exactly the point that I'm trying to make, and I'm not trying to say that you
Yeah.
did. What I'm trying to say is let's not pretend that we knew that we didn't. So
I think I
it's
have that.
that was one of my Virginia Woolf sentences. The what I had in mind what I had in mind is let's be open to the possibility that the body can that I can have a sensory experience in my body even though my actual body isn't doing what my sensory experience tells me that it can be doing. And I don't want us to say, oh, well, Russ thinks we should be going looking for experiences in my body. What my art is, what I've heard you say is you started out by saying something that sounded pretty much like experience it in my body. That's what you wrote down when you looked at your notes there. It said I was re-experiencing it in my body. But then when we talked about it, you made it seem like a sort of a cognitive memory. Well, I had a memory of this. And so this conversation here is
But a
trying to,
memory of a sensory thing is different, I realized, than the memory of other things.
that, that's right.
A little harder to distinguish between reality and recollected image or recollected scent or recollected, yeah.
So yes, I agree with that, but that's not exactly the distinction I was trying to make. I think you can remember a heart situation, and you can also separately recreate a heart situation so that I feel it. It's in my imagination. My heart isn't doing it anymore, but I can still feel it. My experiences of feeling it rather than remembering that I had it. Those can be two very different things. And I would like us to be open to the possibility that they can be two different things, and that I'm not saying that I prefer one to the other.
Yeah.
What my art is, to the extent that we have called this thing that I'm doing an art, is to have heard you talk in two sort of smushed together ways, which I would like to
Sort out.
sort
I
out if
would
we can.
say the former. I mean, hold on one second.
And I would also say about my art is that I don't care what your answer is going to be to. I would say the former, because my art is iterative. This conversation that we're having here is not trying to get at what happened on February 7th at 11:15 or whatever it was in the afternoon.
11:15, yeah.
That's water over the dam as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
What I'm interested in is what's going to happen next time.
Yeah.
And so the next time we're somewhat better at distinguishing between a memory of a bodily event and a bodily re-experience of it,
Which is also a memory of a bodily event. It's a different kind of memory.
but a different kind of memory.
Right.
And the problem is if we use memory for both of those terms, both of those things, then we get ourselves really confused.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. But there is a kind of purely cognitive memory that's registering the data. Yeah, I had this experience last night. And then there is another kind, which is much more, I mean, I used the word vivid before, and I think it's accurate in this context. That is, involves running the experience again to some extent. You still know it's not really happening at that moment, but you can kind of put yourself back and to the feeling of it. And I think that's what was going on.
Okay.
And it was accompanied by this sense of worry. And I don't know that the word worry, I don't know where I put it on. I guess I put it in an emotional range, not a cognitive range, but I'm not sure.
And setting aside the word, do you experience some emotion at the time of this
Yeah,
beep?
I mean, it's the emotion of, concern. Um,
And how do you experience that?
and yeah, no, I think worry isn't, I mean, worry is a complicated thing. Um, it can be purely cognitive and it can be much more emotional. I would say this was kind of emotional.
And is it possible to say how you experience that? Worry can be like a rush of thoughts. I've got 10 thoughts all at the same time, and that's what I call worry. Somebody else would
Yeah,
say
there's
I
also,
feel.
remember, we're in the context of a meditation where I have this sense, this normative sense, I shouldn't be thinking about this. There's another time to have those thoughts. I should focus on my breath, or I should release this thought and let it go. And I'm failing to do that. So there's also this sensation when you have thoughts during meditation, when the machinery of thinking is activated, or even machinery of feeling, that you failed in some sense. That this isn't what you should be doing right now. So that's an overlay also.
And so that raises another possibility. So in the act of meditation, presumably I've done a little meditation. I wouldn't call myself a practicing meditator. I've sampled with some practicing meditators, but my understanding is that the thought arises, and then sometime probably a little bit later than that, then the thought, oh, I'm not supposed to be doing that. I should let that thought go, arises.
Right.
And the beep could come in either one of those places. The beep could come as the thought was arising with no, I should let that go. Or it could be that I should let that go is
I
present as
hadn't
a.
gotten to that. I should let that go. But I have enough experience as a meditator that whatever thoughts I'm lost in, there's a nagging sense of you're in the wrong place. But I hadn't yet gotten to you're also supposed to be very gentle about it and not like force the thought out, just kind of let it go.
Right.
And eventually it did go. But it's a complicated moment for thought because there's some censorship or desire for censorship, and but it's precisely worries that are very good at intruding, and this
Got
was
it.
a good one.
Okay. I think I'm ready to move on to number 5.
Okay, 5 and 6 are like very close together. They're a minute apart. At 11:55, I'm opening my phone to call my mother. My mother's 94. She's got some health problems. I knew she was back because of text traffic. I knew she was back from a doctor's appointment. So I'm opening my phone to call her. At the moment of the beep, uh, I see before I can even dial her or open the phone program, I see that there are texts on a sibling's text chain. And the thought I'm having at this moment is better look at these texts first, because this may have some bearing on my phone call or how to handle it. And there's a feeling of, again, worry, concern. I wonder what's going on. I would not say that was verbalized. It was all very automatic. I mean, anybody about to make a phone call, seeing texts relevant to that phone call would, it was kind of a automatic program, right? I got to look at these texts first before I dial. And then, so I'm going to do these two beeps together to start, or not. But
Well,
they,
I would say let's do the first one and not do the second one at all. So let's
okay.
let's do the first one as best we can, and and then just skip the second one as being too close.
Okay.
So a better look at these texts first. I didn't understand whether that was a sort of an explicit thought that you had, or whether that was sort of a skillful way of dealing with the text. I see the text, and now I'm going to go in that direction.
I barely had to articulate it to myself. It was just so obvious. So it it didn't even need words, but it was close to language. I better look, better look at these. So if it was a sentence, it was a fragment. It was just such an obvious move that it didn't bear a lot of. It went by very quickly.
So the first step of the question, my question, I guess, is there a thought, whether it's an important thought or a so obvious thought or whatever, doesn't matter to me one way or the other about that. But the question is whether there is some kind of a, in front of the footlights of my consciousness, cognitive processing, I better look at this, as opposed to the alternative would be, I open my phone, I see the text, and then in a skillful way, I do what I need to do to see the texts. And there's no cognitive process at all. There is I need to press this button, or my thumb presses this button, and then I see the text.
No, it was a little more cognitive than that.
Okay.
As I remember it, it was like I'm checking myself from dialing her number, saying, "Look at this first.
Okay.
This might be relevant."
So there's some cognitive processing that's before the footlights of consciousness.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes something like, well, are there words involved with this?
Yeah.
And I've heard several versions of this. I should look, better look.
Yeah. Words were involved, but not like the last one where it sort of felt like there was time for a sentence to fully form. Here it was like I barely needed words, but they were in the neighborhood.
Okay.
And there was some talking to myself, the better look. Part of me was saying to the part of me that just wanted to dial, stop. So there was a little bit of a pause between the Michael that was ready to press his mom's number on favorites and the Michael saying, wait, better look at the text. But it was, not a lot of time, but there was some time. I felt 2 moments.
So is there a voice involved in these words? So there's at least 3 possibilities here that I think we haven't yet teased apart adequately. And those three possibilities are, I have a cognitive processing that doesn't really involve direct words, but if you had to put them in words, it would be, hang on, I got to look, better look, something might be happening here. If I had to put them into words, the words would be something like that. There's a cognitive processing. I know what the cognitive processing means. I'm doing the cognitive processing, so I don't need any words, but the processing itself is there. That's one possibility. And another possibility is that there are words present. Those words are better look or something like that. And then another possibility is that there are words present like better look, and they're present in some kind of a voice. That there are vocal, auditory, productive, whatever characteristics.
Yeah, it wasn't so distinct that I heard a voice. It was, in some sense I was talking to myself, but it was such a simple and fast motion between I was just checking myself. And I think those words were present, but I don't know. One of the things I've experienced doing this is that there are degrees of articulation of internal words. and sometimes they're very sketchy, but they're still there. It was still a thought that was verbalized, but not completely. I don't know if that makes sense, but I've had this before in other beeps in the last batch, that maybe the words are coming a little bit later. Maybe there's a process of refining of the thoughts that moves toward language. I'm not sure, but it's barely verbal, but it's verbal.
So the trick of the exercise that we're engaged in here is to be interested in these things without imposing this is the way I think it ought to be. This is the way it must be. This is.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to ratify some theory that I've already got.
I know you're allergic to theory.
Yeah. And I think I think it's difficult. I think we're in a realm where when you say I'm talking to myself, if one says I'm talking to myself, then that seems like, well, there's got to be words involved, because talking is one word after another word after another word. That's what we mean by talking.
Right.
And so when we say out loud, I'm talking to myself, then it runs the risk of saying, well, there must have been words. Now that I've said I'm talking to myself, in order to be consistent with what I just said, there must be words there. Right. So we got to disabuse ourselves.
We use a shorthand too. We can talk to ourselves in an elaborate way when it's a complicated idea, but we also just use this shorthand for every day. Like, I should put down the toilet seat after I pee. I mean, it's like, I don't run the whole sentence, but there's that reminder, like, this is proper behavior. And it's somewhat verbal, but in such an elementary way.
Yes. But there's a theory involved there too, which I would like to dispose of or bracket.
What's the theory there?
And the theory is that when I engage in an action, even as simple as putting down the toilet seat, that there must have been some kind of a thought that's before that. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's possible that I'm done peeing and I see this, and I see the seat, and I have a skill. My peeing skill involves putting down the seat when I'm done, and there is no longer a thought required. Maybe there was at one time. I had to think of myself because I didn't used to do that. My wife nagged me and whatever, and then now I've learned how to do that. And I used to have to tell myself, but now I've incorporated it, and I just sort of automatically do it. And so maybe I'm not a mind reader. I'm not trying to say, well, I know Michael doesn't have to think about these things when he pees, or he does have to think about it. I don't know. But what I would like us to do is not assume that there has to be a thought, that I have to in some way talk to myself.
I know, and often there isn't. I mean, there's lots of stuff I do automatically. I tend to I'm a little absent-minded, so I remind myself of things all the time.
So there's
like, put this in the dishwasher. What?
That's a self-theory that you're describing here, and it may very well be true.
Yeah.
It may very well be true in some particular manner of speaking that doesn't have to do with high frequency. I mean, what you just said was a frequency argument. Mm-hmm. So I engage in these kinds of things with high frequency. And it could very well be that you engage in those things not with really high frequency, but with high salience, so that you remember those things because you're worried about them or whatever. And so that's the kind of self-theory that I would like us to bracket.
Right.
Maybe I talk to myself a lot. Maybe I'm absent-minded. It's not that so the bracketing skill is not to say, well, I'm not, I don't ever think about this as I might have thought. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, let's not presume that I've got these kinds of things. Let's let the data show that. If it turns out that the data shows me talking to myself and remembering to put the dishes in the dishwasher or whatever, well, then so be it. I'll find those things.
But we all put our thoughts in categories, right? I'm trying to show you what category it felt like to me. It was like one of those things that is on the verge of being automatic, but might need a little bit of a push from self-talk.
And are we back to talking about Beep 5 here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Better look. I mean, that's all it was. Better look.
Okay.
And as I say, there was some aura of words,
Okay.
but it's not so, I didn't hear it. I didn't speak it. It was just kind of like, it was almost like a sign, better look.
So the interesting thing, the art or whatever of descriptive experience sampling is at any particular sample, like this particular sample, I would say I don't really know what's in his experience about better look. It's somewhere in the vicinity of some words. I'm not really sure about that. Whether these words are spoken or not, maybe it's just a concept. We're not really sure about that. But what we have done is we have had a conversation that is possibly going to make us better able to speak unambiguously about more or less similar phenomena later.
Right. Well, it's about speaking ambiguously, but it's also about an ambiguous thought. I mean, what I'm trying to convey is that it doesn't fall clearly on one side or the other of a kind of articulated self-talk and something else, which is close to automaticity, but not quite there. That is getting a little push from
Okay.
whatever voice in your head keeps you on track. So
I have spoken about bracketing presuppositions as if it was all your job. You're going to learn how to bracket these things, but it's true for me as well. So my job is to try to set aside what my experiences so that I can hear what Michael is trying to tell me, and that's as equally as important.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the task. It's quite possible that Michael said just exactly what was in his experience at the moment of the beep, and I was, and I'm spinning these theories. Well, it could be that, and it could be that, and it could be this other thing, and that's all on my side, and I'm open to that as well. That's
okay. I mean, yeah. I mean, you have some categories. And, we've talked about before, verbal, visual, etc. And I'm developing them for myself in this process.
right.
And maybe I shouldn't think in terms of categories, but, the questions that now play in my head when I'm recording what happened, I'm trying to anticipate the kinds of questions that you might ask about it. Was this a fully formed vision? I mean, now I'll think, who's talking? Am I talking to myself? Am I listening? So yeah, I think we're both trying to learn each other's categories.
I think that's fair. What I think the art of this conversation, these conversations, is to not talk past each other. Whether we should say that we're learning categories or whatever, it's that I got to understand what you mean, and you got to understand what I mean,
yeah.
and that just takes some work.
Oh yeah, and these are great questions you're asking, and they're hard. And everything, we're also dealing with memory and what memory does to a moment,
right.
And that may be reflected in the staleness of these beeps.
I think probably is to some degree.
Yeah.
So shall we do it again?
Yeah, we should. And maybe if we could pick a time like after lunch next week, one day, I would give you some really fresh beeps. Good.
I will put that on the calendar and send you a calendar invite. Make sure we're on the same page. But
Thank
I'm
you,
thinking
Russ.
Thursday the 15th at 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
All
Great.
right. Thank you
All
very much.
right. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. Same to you.
Take care.